This is Main Street with Gary Allen. Now, here's Gary.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Main Street. Gary Allen with you, your host. We have a great show for you today. I hope everybody's had a wonderful time since the last time we were together. It was a couple of weeks ago, but we got a great show for you today. A good friend of mine, Mr. Doug Hershey, is joining us. He is, well, let me tell you a little bit about him, and then we'll move on with the show right away. Doug is a writer, a speaker, a storyteller, which he does quite admirably so, and he's also a tour director, a tour operator with Ezra Adventures, which gives tours of Israel and the Middle East. He also has a best-selling book out there called Israel Rising, which I am very lucky to have a copy of, and I'm very proud of it. It's wonderful. We'll talk about it during the show as well. Doug's knowledge of the Middle East, Israel, and Bible prophecy is second to none. With his discussions and lectures that he gives, he has over 2,000 years of knowledge about the history of the Middle East. So without further ado, would you please welcome one of my dear friends in the whole world, right directly from his man cave in Maine. What part of Maine, I don't know. But anyway, Mr. Doug Hershey. Doug, welcome to the program.
Hey, man, great to be on here with you. It's good to spend some time.
It's been a while since we were together. I mean, it's been a couple of years, but
yeah, sure, more than a couple.
Yeah, but and I said I'm very privileged because I have the book that will be up on the screen here a little bit, Israel Rising, and we'll talk about that as well as we will with what's going on with the prophecies and everything else. But where were you when you decided to finally come up with the idea of having a tour group to go to the Middle East? Now, I know you're heavily connected there, but let's go through the process of where did the idea come from? And it didn't blossom overnight. So talk about the steps.
Yeah, I think it really kind of starts with my very first trip to Israel, and I write about it a little bit in my second photo book, Jerusalem Rising. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But my very first experience, I'm in my early 20s with a tour group from the States, both Jewish and Christian, and they were we were doing just a regular sort of bus tour, and I had this moment on the Mount of Olives. And if you're familiar with one of the more iconic views of Jerusalem, you're standing on the Mount of Olives, the Kidron Valley's in front of you, and you see the old walls and the Eastern Gate and the Temple Mount, that sort of thing. That's where I was at. And it was in the fall, and there were these beautiful white puffy clouds rolling over the city. And I had a moment, and I thought, the white puffy clouds look a lot like the white puffy clouds that roll over my house back in the States. And in that moment for me, this was just sort of a personal experience, like, for me, the light bulb came on. Here I am standing in Jerusalem, my first time there, kind of taking in this moment, and suddenly realizing that Jerusalem is not a faraway place. It's not a bedtime story. It's not a Bible teaching anymore. I'm looking at it, and I'm listening to horns and people yelling and stuff going on, and I realized, this is a real city, real people, real problems, and yet real history and real prophecy that has not yet come to pass. And we're sort of in the midst of this. And I knew in that moment that, of course, had no plans, had no idea what was going to happen, how I would get there, what all would happen. I knew in that moment for me, this was going to be a city and a land that I would be connected to throughout my life. And so that's what started the fire for me.
I wish I had met you 20 years ago. I had a dream growing up of being a tour guide through Europe, et cetera, but I missed it because of a lot of things that kind of came into my life and went and et cetera, et cetera. My own ego, which you got to put that aside a little bit. What was it like putting all those pieces together? I mean, all right, you have the idea, you want to put a tour company together. The name, where did you get the name from? Because you could have chosen any biblical name you could think of, but you chose the one you chose. Why? Because I know the last time we spoke, you spoke a great deal of Ezekiel, and I understand why. But where did the name come from for you that you said, yeah, this is the fit?
Well, for me, I've always enjoyed being practical and hands-on in places I go. While I like to travel, I don't enjoy tour buses and traditional hotels and that type of thing. I want to be local. I want to feel what real people are feeling. I want to encounter that. And so how the group started, probably over, gosh, 10, 12 years ago now at this point, I was asked actually to help lead a couple small, like humanitarian aid teams. And while I was doing that, I had an Israeli friend of mine say, "Hey, this you're really good at this. There's no reason you shouldn't do this as a business." So the next year, with no funding, no advertising, no name, no anything, I thought, well, I'm going to try to do 4 trips to see if this could even be profitable for me. And at the end of 2 trips, I realized, okay, I think this could work. And so I prayed at the end of that year, which would have been 2015. I prayed and asked God that by the next year, I prayed what I thought was impossible. I want to lead 8 groups next year, and by the end of the following year, I'd actually led 9. And those were groups that were connecting with locals, helping with local projects, helping with local, whether it be cleanup things, building, sometimes involved with harvest. And so back to your original question, Ezra in Hebrew means help, or we say Ezra. So it's sort of this help adventure with a way that provides small groups, 10 to 12 people at the most, that gives people practical, hands-on skills and abilities to connect with sort of what's happening in the land. And both we've done this both with in Palestinian Christian communities as well as Jewish communities, and just coming to help and be involved. And so we're having dinner in people's homes, we're staying locally, we're traveling locally. And so it's while we are tying in aspects of tourism and hitting some of the biblical sites, part of the real goal isn't so much of, hey, let's do a tour, as much as it is to let's connect with people, let's build those relationships. And you find that people are people wherever you go, man. And people just enjoy a good meal, laughing at dinner, making new
Yes.
friends, being
Yes. Yes.
appreciated. I mean, it's people are like that wherever. And now we can do that in the land of the Bible.
Yes, absolutely. What was it like to put, as I said, the pieces together besides yourself? Because I know you have a team now, the First Harvest team, which we will talk about as we move forward in the program. But what was it like putting those pieces together, like pieces of a puzzle, and then you finally get the last piece in and you go, yeah. Although those pieces can be interchangeable because times do change as you move along, people come and go. But
For sure.
what does it take for someone to work for you as a tour guide? Now, I put myself up as an example. I think I could be wrong. I've been a tour guide in the city of Chicago and other places like that to make money. I think I could have worked for you because you know of my deep biblical and religious faith, as well as my commitment to doing the best job that I possibly can. Um, but what do you look for in an individual to go to work for you to help conduct the tours and talk about all the places in Israel, and we're gonna get to that because I have a very crazy question to ask you, but what kind of people could work for you? Could I have worked for you? And if you tell me no, I'm not gonna have my feelings hurt because I was divorced once and she told me no.
Primarily with, especially in Israel, I'm primarily working with Israelis. So my logistics team is based out of Israel. I've used a couple different companies for that. I have a couple um, uh, tour guides that I absolutely, if I'm doing a group, I've got a very short list of guys that I trust. And really where a lot of that comes out of is just being in the land. So it wasn't so much of just going through a list and I'll try this guy or I'll try that guy. One of the things I love about the Middle East, and this is in Israel and even in a lot of Arab countries, is that you can make plans and you can hire somebody and do whatever. Nothing really happens until you sit down and have a coffee with somebody, or you have a meal. And
Yes.
so if you sit down and you have a coffee, you talk about the weather, you talk about family, you go on a trip together, then you're locked in. So it's Israel, and in Israel the currency is really relationship. I've seen large groups come in with large amounts of money, spend their money, do big events, and they kind of blow out with the wind. And I've seen other people come in that just really connect locally with people, and that those relationships carry much further than
Yeah.
large piles of money. So
Yeah.
so for me, I like to travel that way. I like to build those relationships with the guys that I work with in Israel. And so for me, one of my primary skills, with if I'm bringing other, other Westerners that are wanting to connect, is, are you okay with having coffee and doing nothing and just sort of, having the day change as it goes? It's a different country, it's a different lifestyle, and relationship is the currency.
Yeah, I was in Israel once when I was a little boy. so I don't remember a whole lot about that. And then I was there when I was in the Air Force. We were dropping off some equipment to the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, and I met. And this was I told you this story I think once before.
Tell
Um,
me again.
I'm I met a captain, a female captain in the IDF, and she was a tank commander and beautiful. I could have fell in love in 30 seconds. But man, I'll tell you what, she was as tough as any nail you could ever possibly come across. And but there's one thing that I really admire about the people in Israel. They know they're outnumbered by the countries that surround them, and we're not going to get into the politics of it. But boy, I'll tell you what, they will fight to the end. They will not give up. They swear they would never give up since 1948, and they're not going to be pushed around anymore. And other countries who have tried to push them around have found out that's not a good thing to do. That really is not a good thing to do. But that's just my 2 cents in it. But yeah, I met this young lady. We corresponded for a number of years, and then she got married. And God bless her. I don't know what she does now, but you know, the
Still
IDF.
tough
They
as
don't.
nails, I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm sure she married somebody who was in the IDF too. And for those of you who don't know, the IDF is the Israeli Defense Force that controls Israel and et cetera. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. After 10 years of conducting tours, and of course you lecture and other things, what is the average person like that goes on the tours with you? And what are they looking for? Well, we can talk about looking for in a little bit, but what is the average person like? Are they a person of faith to begin with, or are they searching for something that they don't believe existed, or are they just reaffirming what they've read in the Bible and Bible prophecy, and they want to see it? Which, by the way, in the book Israel Rising, you can see tons, about 100 photos of comparison pictures of yesterday and today in Israel and the Middle East. So it's a great book, and I love the book. And this man sent it to me, and I'm so proud of having that book. Um, but what's the average tourist like that goes on your tours?
Most people that are coming are believers, and they have a fascination and a connection to the land where they want to see it, experience it themselves, but they don't want to go on a regular bus trip. So it's not unusual. Again, if I've got groups of 8 or 10 or maybe 12 people at the most, by day 2 or day 3, it's not unusual to have somebody make a comment, point at a bus and say, man, I'm glad I'm not on one of those. And so there are people that not only just want to travel smaller, but want to connect locally, and especially because of my work with Israel Rising and Jerusalem Rising, and we'll talk about this in a moment. I know that right now we are at a time in history where we
Yeah.
can document some of the words of the prophets. There are things that have been lying dormant in the prophets, in the Bible, that have been lying dormant for 2,600 years that are coming to pass right now. And not in an allegorical, or maybe it's this or symbolic that, but I'm talking about facts and figures and verifiable evidence and photographic proof. And so so I'm saying that to say, when people are coming with me on some of these trips, especially like some of the work trips, to connect with local farmers, or get involved with local communities, what they're looking for excuse me, what they're looking for is 2 things. Number one is, of course, follow into some of the steps of the biblical prophets, or the steps of Jesus, looking back a couple thousand years ago. But they're coming with me because they recognize that I am documenting the things that the prophets talked about. And so there's a lot of places, like, I'll give you an example, like in Jeremiah 31, 5, it says that again, the hills of Samaria there'll be vineyards in the hills of Samaria, and the planters will enjoy its fruit. From the time that Jeremiah spoke those
Hmm.
words
Yeah.
until about 30 years ago, there were never vineyards on those hills. And so now I can take people to, and we're talking about historically, verifiably accurate information. I can now take people to some of those hills in Samaria where the vineyards are and say, we're going to have lunch. Surrounded in biblical prophecy. These are the vineyards. The vineyards you are tasting and walking through and having lunch in have never been here since the time that Jeremiah prophesied it. So, part of our joke is, how does Bible prophecy taste to you today? what would you like, some red Bible prophecy, or would you like some white Bible prophecy to sip on? But my point is, these are practical and tangible things. So when people are coming with me, they're looking for small groups, they're looking to connect with the Bible, but they're
Right.
also wanting to interact and experience what is literally happening right now in the nation of Israel that the prophets talked about, that have never happened before in human history until right now.
We're talking to Doug Hershey. He is the tour guide, tour operator, speaker, uh, author, you name it. Right here on Main Street, you can catch all this information about his tours on Ezra, EZRA adventures.com. Go to his website. You can also catch him on Facebook if you're there. You can look him up there and you can get an easy click right there, and you can get all the information about the tours and stuff right then and there. Um, Question that a friend of mine asked me the other day, and we talked about this before we went on the air. Do some people who take the tours with you, do they think, oh, we're going to get in these vans like they do here in the United States? We're going to travel for maybe 45 minutes or an hour. They're going to make a right hand turn. And suddenly there is a replica of first century Israel. Do people, I mean, I know that may sound silly in today's world, but are there people that think that, oh, well, maybe there's a Jesus land over there in Israel somewhere?
Yeah, listen, there we have a lot of people, and they're, of course, well-meaning. There's no, criticism or mockery here, but there's a lot of people that, they only imagine Israel one of two places. Either it's like desert Bible land, or it's a land of war and conflict or whatever, and they have trouble putting those pieces together. So sometimes I'll have groups where, like you said, we'll kind of go around the corner, or we'll stop at a particular site, or see some old ruins, and somebody will say, was this here when Jesus was here? And I'll say, no, these are actually from the Ottoman Empire about 150 years ago. So it's like, people don't realize how long of a time period 2,000 years is. We view history
Mhm.
by our own eyes, and so we know Israel as a country that has always been there if you've been born after 1948. Um, but the fact that it's there after almost 2,000 years of desolation and just being completely empty and removed, is really hard to kind of wrap your head around. So, when you're coming with lots of Bible stories in your mind, and you, of course, imagine how things are going to be, you'll get there and people will say, "I had no idea. Like, this is like, these malls are nicer than what we have in America. Like, I had no idea we'd see these green rolling hills. I had no idea there'd be, farms with hay bales and cows out in the field, and there's a, guy
Yeah.
with sheep and goats over there while, going through, up to the biblical site of like Caesarea Maritima, where Paul was in prison, and Peter came to Cornelius's house and the Holy Spirit fell, and like all of these things are just sort of all interwoven in this little land that's about the size of New Jersey. So it's a bit
Yeah.
of a it's hard to kind of wrap your head around if you're coming with these romantic ideas from, Bible stories.
Right. I mean, yeah, I mean, the Garden of Kissimmee, I guess, would be one spot that most people would probably want to go to, since that's where he spent his final night before the Sanhedrin came and got him, or the soldiers did. The Roman soldiers came and got him. Um, but what are some of the most often asked questions to you that you enjoyed over the years?
You're talking about in the country?
Yeah, when you're in the country and people are, maybe you're walking along and you're talking to someone, or somebody will ask you on a bus, while you're having a meal. What are some of the questions that are most often asked that, again, that are most often asked?
Yeah, one of them is, because many believers are coming with a strong faith, they're wanting to connect with what they read in the Bible to some actual locations. And so, we'll talk about this in a moment, of course, but since October 7th,
Yeah,
2023, since the Hamas massacre, I've had the honor and the privilege to lead 9 different harvest teams to Israel during wartime, and we were some of the only people that were there. So to be able to take Christian groups to go and sit in a place like Capernaum when there's no one there, like what I've been there before, where there's been, without exaggeration, probably 15 buses with people from all over the world. It's shoulder to shoulder. It's jam packed, and guides are kind of jockeying with each other and kind of helping each other get in and out. We had groups there where there was nothing. We literally sat on the Sea of Galilee on the shore in Capernaum
Wow.
and listened to the birds. Like there was literally no one there. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
so there's been some of these really special times, and when to me where some of the most valuable questions that people ask, isn't so much of tourism as much as it is to recognizing um, that here we are in a place that I've dreamed about and I read about, and much like my story at the beginning about having this moment of like this is real. It's really undeniable when you again have an opportunity to sit on the shores of the Sea of Galilee in Capernaum, where Jesus lived for 3 years, and it's where he called some of his disciples. Right over there by the water, and he probably James and John were from this over area, and right up the hillside is where the Mount of Beatitudes was. Where he spoke Matthew 5, 6, and 7, and
Yeah.
when you connect it to all of these local places, the real question is, how long can we stay? And so that's actually one of my one of my most common things that people ask is that,
Yeah.
sometimes I'll just, we'll talk about a place, we'll connect it with the Bible, and then I'll just say, listen, I'm going to give you 15 or 20 minutes. When we're ready, we'll head to lunch, or we'll go to our next spot. And then eventually I'm calling people together after 30 minutes, and people are saying, "But why are you calling us so soon? Like, it was only 5 or 10 minutes," right? Like, like, people are
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
having their moment. And so I would say that's probably one of the most often asked questions is, "Why are we leaving so soon?" Like, and it's like, well, you know, so but that's to me, that's a hard thing to explain without actually being there when people are just connected with their faith, with their land, and they're literally sitting at the place where Peter and James and John threw their nets in, or where Jesus was teaching in the temple courts, or where David killed Goliath in the Valley of Elah that's west of Jerusalem. So
Right.
there are these profound moments that most people have this experience of. I knew the Bible was real, but now I know the
Yeah.
Bible is real.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm here, like I get it now.
I had a friend of mine who went to Israel, 10 years ago or so, before I knew you. And he said, Gary, when I got they went up to a Megiddo. He wanted to go there. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term Megiddo, it's Armageddon. That's where it's all supposed to come together and begin 1,000 years of Jesus's reign on earth. If I have that right, please correct me, would you, Doug? I mean, because I'm not as well versed as you are, but that's my understanding. And he said, Gary, the hairs on my arm and neck just stood up. He said, I cried. He said, I cried. He said, I said, I couldn't hold back the whole time I was there for 5 days. Every place we went, there was just something that just hit me hard and struck me hard. You read about these things in the Bible, and then when you're there, you see it and you go, oh, okay, wow, you
Yeah,
know?
I'll give you another quick story, very similar to that. I led a group of pastors. This was actually a larger group of about 25. This was probably 7, 8 years ago. Um, and it was a group of pastors. Some of them knew who I was, some of them didn't. One of the guys that didn't, I could, he's been in ministry 40 some years. I mean, just a well versed pastor who had just been through the mill in terms of ministry and things that all the pastors endure. And I'm sure I had this very strong sense that when we first met, he kind of looked at me of like, who's this guy in a t-shirt that's going to tell me something new about what's going on here? And we interacted a little bit, and he was, he was kind, but I mean, he wasn't accommodating or out of his way pleasant or anything like that. We got on a boat on the Sea of Galilee, and I just started pointing out like Capernaum's over there, and this is where Magdala is, and what you're on the north side of the Sea of Galilee is where over 2/3 of the miracles and teachings of Jesus happen. So I just want you to take a few moments and just soak in where you're at. And this old, crusty, grumpy pastor, he cried like a baby. And and after that day, after he had that moment on the Sea of Galilee when he had that moment, our relationship changed the rest of the trip. He was kind. He smiled at me, which was something that wasn't happening before. He would ask questions. He was much more engaged. But that's just what happens in the land, man. I just you I find as not even as an official Israeli tour guide, but as somebody who leads these things, if you just read the Bible at the places where it happens and you just stand back, I mean, everything just sort of takes over from there. And, and what everybody says about the land is, you come back reading the Bible in like living color. Like it really does make the difference.
Well, yeah, I mean, it does. I mean, if you are, I was at the Vatican once, no, twice. I'm sorry, and of course, I didn't make reservations to take the tour. Uh, But I will tell you, just standing outside and seeing that enormous building, I cried. I'm a big baby when it comes to things. I believe in the Lord Jesus Christ as my Savior, and I believe that God exists. I believe that there are things out there that we don't understand. That God controls the planets and the cosmos and all that other stuff. And there's much that we do not understand and much to be explained. Um, are there different types of tours that you give? Oh, well, before I get to that, when you say you guys stop and have lunch, do you have a typical Israeli kind of lunch? You don't stop off at Burger King or McDonald's, I don't think. So do you have a typical Israeli kind of lunch or Mediterranean type of food that you dine with for lunch or dinner?
Yeah, it kind of depends on day to day. Everybody is at least going to get one shot with a quality falafel.
No.
So you have a pita, and you've got falafel. It's different than the kind of falafel maybe you'd get here in the States. We do
Yeah.
that one day. The other is a shawarma, which is like a large, I don't know, I'd say maybe a Mediterranean burrito kind of thing wrapped in flatbread with just incredibly marinated, beautiful meat. There's always going to be things like hummus. Hummus in the States is more of like a dip for some veggies, and there you get it in bowls as a meal. It's just everything's different. So
Yeah.
for me, again, if you're coming with me, we are avoiding we're avoiding hotel buffets and we're eating local. I want to eat where the locals are eating. I want to eat the street food. I want to eat, like we're immersive, eating eating what locals eat, eating, something at my favorite roadside stands, that little favorite coffee shops between, the Galilee and Jerusalem. We're making some stops. So yeah, it's those are my favorites. So that's what you get.
Yeah. Yeah, I people would be greatly surprised if they go to Europe in general, as well as the Mediterranean, to find out the eating habits of the locals are a lot different than what you think that goes on here. A
That's for
pizza in this
sure.
country is something you have for dinner. A pizza in Italy is something you have for lunch, and it's much smaller. And it's just like, it's like having a sandwich. It's not what you necessarily think it is. Um, are there different types of tours that you provide during the year? For instance, during Christmas as compared to Easter, and places you go that are different than, say, other times, other tours. Um, a- and also one thing, the size of your tours are small to medium size. Is that done on purpose so you can have more of an interaction with people as you're taking them to the day by day tours?
Yeah, for sure. And the easy answer with that, I like keeping the small groups. Again, sort of 8 to 10 people, 12 maybe is sort of my cutoff. And the reason why that is there are some I love off the beaten path. Like you can go to Israel and you can get on the bus and you can do sort of the tourism monster and you see a lot of the incredible biblical sites.
Yeah.
But I could take the same small group back to Israel probably 4 different times. It would be brand new every time. There would be new biblical locations, new biblical sites, new things to see, new things to experience.
Right.
And so, so for me, there are places that I like taking groups to that I can get a group of 8 or 10 into that I can't get a group of 15 or 20 into in terms of both unexcavated biblical locations or my favorite like there's a place up in the Galilee that that's a sheep farm, and like it's not a tourism place, it's a local place, and you drive in and you park and you talk to the family, and the family's got a little shop that's under some olive trees, and and they serve all of these different kinds of homemade breads that are made in their oven, then their bread oven right over here. They All of their local cheeses are made from their own sheep. and and they've got all of these different types and kinds, and they've got some vegetables, and so it's like this local place that there's no sign out front, and
Hmm.
so, but that's a group. If I show up with 8 people, we can get a table and sit down, in the shade of olive trees and just enjoy. Whereas, there's no bus going in there to stop off with 20 or 30 people that's going to accommodate that. And so for me, it's like those are some of the real treasures are sitting in the Galilee, enjoying sheep cheese, homemade bread that's still warm from, this local
Hmm.
family that moved here, and eventually as we build relationships, I'll have these people come out and say, tell us where you're like, tell us your aliyah story, tell us the story of how you came to Israel, and when, where did you come from and what did you find. And so we turn it into sort of these relational conversations that, that again, it's hard to do with 20 people.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
so for me, that's one of the joys of really kind of helping people connect to the land, because yes, there are some really wonderful high-end tours that you can go see all of the sites, but there's a lot of those things where you can see the sites and never really see the real Israel, and the real people and the real connection and what life is like there, and the struggle. So for that, and I'll get back to your first question. For me, there's no particular time of year that I'm taking trips. A lot of times, because these are smaller groups, sometimes a church will contact me and say, "Hey, we would love to do a leadership group of 8 or 10 people in February," or so we set that up specifically based on where they want to go, what they want to do, what they want to see, what they want to learn about, and connect with each other. Like I said, since in the last 2.5 years now, since October 7th, I have only been taking harvest teams, which means that since October 7th, during that massacre, a lot of the farms where if they had 8 or 10 people working for them, um, the workers of the farm, especially on the Gaza border, were either killed, kidnapped, or ran away. And so then a lot of those farmers went right into defending their homes and their families, or going in with their special forces units. And so a lot of my groups were connecting, again, very personally, very locally, with these farmers, saying, "We're
Hmm.
here to help. I'm bringing teams of farmers, or I'm bringing teams of farmers, or excavators or contractors or whatever. Like, what can we do um, to help get some of these things back online, like even
Yeah,
just harvest, because they're
yeah.
in most literal sense, especially for the first year, but it's still true now, is that there are large portions of the agricultural industry in Israel where the harvest really is plentiful and the workers few. So even just as recently as last year, I was working with had a group up in the Golan Heights, up on the Syrian border, and we were hearing that one of the local valleys, because of the weather and the temperature and everything, all of the apricot farmers were all in a
Excuse me.
panic. And it was on the local news. The
Yeah.
apricot farmers were saying, anybody, if you can come, like, just this was all over Israel. Just if anybody can come, even just for a half a day, even just for one day, we just need some hands, because it wasn't a matter of how much they were going to lose. It was, how much they could save before it all rotted on the tree, because there was just so much and not enough hands, because
Right.
Israel is still, going through their cycles of reservists being called up to their units, and this
Yeah.
is
Oh, yeah.
through
Yeah.
this war. It's been the largest national call up in Israel's modern history, and so that makes a huge impact. So
Yeah.
so for me, those have been the priority, is not just connecting people with the land, but connecting people with the real needs, and with the harvest. It's a way that we can not only bless the farmers, but we're blessing all of the communities, because everybody there, whether you're Christians, Arabs, Druze, Muslims, whatever, you're all enjoying fresh produce at the market.
We're talking to Doug Hershey, who is a dear friend of mine from, and by the way, he said he loves these out of the way, obscure places. He lives in Maine, folks. It doesn't get any more obscure and out of the way than Maine.
That's it.
But his name is Doug Hershey. He's a wonderful person. Go on to Ezra, Ezra, adventures.com. Find out more about the tours, find out more about him. There's a phone number, I think, connected there that if you want to contact him about doing lectures or storytellers in your local community, he is fantastic. There is no doubt about it. When people are done with your tours after 4 or 5 days or however long they are, do people come away with a better understanding of what has been going on in the Middle East and in Israel, and what may be going on in the future than they did before? they hear what they hear on the local news, and that always isn't the right perspective, even with some of their reporters that are out on the field that have been in the Middle East for years. Do people have a better understanding of what is really going on there, not only in the political arena, but as far as what the IDF does and the other countries that surround Israel, what's going on there? Do they have a better understanding of what is happening there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of I have personal friends that they're in special forces units. I've got a close personal friend whose job has been in the last 2.5 years. He's in one of the we call it one of the sapper units. Part of his job is going into Hamas tunnels, defusing booby traps, and blowing up the tunnels. And so, and this is a personal friend of mine. So and I often am trying to get my groups to spend time with these guys, or having these guys giving sort of personal briefings. And almost everyone you know, uh, down to the last person on these trips will say, I had no idea. Like, nobody's telling us what's actually happening here.
Yeah,
And so the biggest thing, people ask about, well, what about what about this genocide, and what about the starvation, and what about this, and what about that? And it's like, listen, I'm in the land 4 or 5 months of the year. I can take you to these locations. I can introduce you to IDF commanders who have been doing this, and meaning fighting the war. And you can
right.
ask them those types of questions. And so we try to make those connections as personally as we can. And what you find is that all of the groups come back going, what we see in the West um, is a bunch of BS. It is outright deceptive lies, especially. And I know this sounds like a political statement. I'm telling you, as somebody who is there, the majority of what you see about Israel is a
Hmm.
twisted, half truth bent based on somebody's political narrative that has no real validity in the land. And I'll give you I want to talk about the books. I'll give you one story about
Yeah.
this. Is that you back back when Trump first moved the embassy to Jerusalem, everybody was saying, it's going to be war, it's going to be panic, it's going to be crazy. Nothing happened. I had a personal friend that told me, a personal Palestinian friend in Bethlehem, who told me, I said, what was it like? And he said, what do you mean? What was it like? Nothing happened. And I said, well, we were seeing stuff on the news. And he says, I'll tell you what happened. A Reuters photographer, on the day that the embassy was moved to Jerusalem, a Reuters photographer came out to photograph the crazy and all the protests, and there wasn't any. So he started paying Palestinian kids $20 a person to start throwing rocks at the Israeli
Oh,
soldiers. He
oh,
does
dear
that.
God.
Israeli soldiers then start responding with rubber bullets and tear gas, and then that brings in more of the kids, and so they've got this thing. So the photographer is getting some great shots, and then as a result, the Israelis bring in some of their this crowd dispersal water cannon thing. That's not just a water cannon, but it's like sulfur, sewage, skunk type of smell that just is. It's a non-lethal thing, but it's a crowd dispersal is just awful.
Yeah.
And all of this happens in front of a hotel called the St. Michael's Hotel. It's one of the very few Christian hotels in Bethlehem. It completely soaks the front of the hotels. The hotel has to shut down. Of a Christian run hotel, they have to let their people go for like a week until they get all of this stuff cleaned up. All because there was no riots, and a Reuters photographer was paying kids to get photos so that they could then have some content to fit the narrative that the Arab world was losing their mind based on Trump's move to move the embassy to Jerusalem when nothing was happening. So when I'm
Yeah.
talking about things that you see on the news in the West, it is theater. I mean, sometimes
Yeah.
it is just downright theater. And I'm not telling you a story I'm telling you a story that I'm hearing firsthand from Arab friends in Bethlehem who were there.
Yeah. I listen, being in the media as long as I have, I know BS when I see it, even local in New York or Philadelphia or wherever. And of course, you live up in Maine, but um, on your website, I want to change gears here a little bit because I want to get into biblical prophecy, if we might, sir. On
Let's do it.
your website, you talk about the course, and the website again is EzraAdventures.com. Go in there. This course, I think, is for anybody who's interested in biblical prophecy or the Bible itself, to maybe answer some questions for you or to open your eyes a little bit. I mean, for instance, I'm a student of Kabbalah. And I know Doug knows very well what that is. So, uh, but talk about biblical prophecy in regards to the course, what people get from it, what people learn from it.
Yeah, the online course is called 10 Prophecies Fulfilled in Your Lifetime. Um, and that's exactly what we talk about. We look at 10 biblical prophecies that have been lying dormant in the scriptures that are literally being fulfilled in a very tangible and practical way, in a way that human history has never seen before. And I'm taking you to those places in the course to show you, not only to read the scriptures, but to show you exactly what's happening and how those things are unfolding in a very tangible and practical way. And so normally when we talk about Bible prophecy, we, like, if I'm speaking somewhere and people have a prophecy question, it's going to be about something in the future. Who's the Antichrist, and what about the second temple and this Gog and Magog war that's coming from the north, and what about this, and when do you think that's going to
Yeah.
happen? And so my response is, I don't know. But what I can tell you is that the things that the prophets had talked about is being fulfilled right now. So, for example, one of the most profound is the fact that the Jewish people are back in the land. One of the
Hmm.
most repeated promises in the Bible, over and over and over and over again, God saying, I will restore you to the land. I have not forgotten you. I'm keeping my promise and my covenant. I'm going to bring you back. And so, historically, when we look at that, never before in human history has there been a people group on a particular piece of land that had been forcibly removed, and then come back to that same piece of land for a few hundred years, and then forcibly removed again, scattered to the ends of the world for 2,000 years, to then come back to the exact same piece of real estate as an identifiable and recognizable people, speaking the same language, studying the same scriptures, the same culture, the same everything as their ancestors who lived there before. Never before in human history has anything like that happened, and it's all written through the scriptures. And so there are facts and figures and documents and things that we can give you visually, that isn't of like, well, maybe it's this, or it could be that, or this is sort of allegorical and symbolic, and that's what that means. I'm talking about, like we mentioned in Jeremiah. Jeremiah says there's vineyards on the hills of Samaria. Let me take you to them. But
Yep.
when the Bible talks about the waste and forgotten cities are being rebuilt, I can take you to some of those waste and forgotten cities, and one of them being, aside from Jerusalem, which has been conquered and reconquered 40 different times. It's been completely destroyed at least twice.
Yeah,
It's
but
never.
it is rising again,
it-
and it
exactly.
matters a lot. It matters a lot that Jerusalem is rising again.
It is, and I guess that's my point, is that the prophets talk about a time when the Jewish people will return to Jerusalem. Jerusalem will be under full and complete sovereignty, and that city will revive and come back to life in a way that it never has been before. And right now, and that's part of the photo book that I've done called Jerusalem Rising. I have photos from 1844. One of some of the oldest photos of Jerusalem ever taken. We found the exact rock outcropping where these photographers set up their gear in 1844, and we reshot those angles. In fact, if you go to EzraAdventures.com, I have it on a little slider where you see the old photo and the new photo, and you can click on the line. You can kind of slide it back and forth to see the then and now transformation. But what's amazing about that is in 1844, it's run by the Ottomans, and there's an Ottoman sultan who orders a census of the Ottoman Empire. He's looking to revitalize the Ottoman Empire and kind of try to get things back in line with Ottoman rule. And so it's really, as far as I know, it's the first census of Jerusalem since biblical times. And according to Muslim census documents, in 1844, the exact same year that these two guys, of course, never knew each other, never met, this French photographers set up and took these photos in 1844. In 1844, this year, the same year that this Ottoman Sultan says we need a census, they discover there's 15,000 people in Jerusalem, and the majority of the population in 1844, over 7,000 of the population, are Jewish. And so when the Bible talks about, I'm going to bring you back to the land and I'm going to multiply my people on the land and the waste and forgotten cities will be rebuilt, we
Yeah.
have photo documentation that show a photo of Jerusalem from 1844 with historical documentation of saying there's 15,000 people there. And we now have the exact same photo angle with the same amount of documenting of almost 1 million people there. So when we're talking about God multiplying his people from 15,000 to almost a million within, what, 175 years? That
Yep,
sounds like multiplication. And so the land really is reviving exactly as the prophets talked about. And we're at a time where we can document that, and that's all in the course.
exactly. I want to get to October 7th, if we might, sir. That was a horrific day for anybody who was human. We're talking to Doug Hershey, by the way. He's the writer, author, speaker of Israel Rising. Boy, I hope I get that. I hope I can convince you to send me Jerusalem Rising. I hope I
Well,
can.
that's easy. That's done. We can do that.
Okay. Okay. Um, October 7th, one of the most horrific days of anybody in this world. If you are a human being and you have a pulse, you don't have to be Jewish. You don't have to be Arab. You don't have to be anything. How has the Middle East changed? The IDF, I know, has changed because of it with their tactics and what they look for and what they don't look for. How, in the name of God, do you deal with, I've got to be careful what I say, people who did what they did and have no humanity about themselves? How do you deal with people like that?
It's a really difficult question to answer in the West because we're not used to the level of evil that will say, I'm going to kill you and your family. And even if you kill me in my trying, I'm training my children and my family and my grandchildren and my entire community to continue to fight all to the death. And we are going to take everything that you have. And this is what we live for. We don't, unless you're watching like a horror movie or like some crazy, like imaginary, like we have no concept of what that's like in the West. That's what Hamas, and again, Hamas, Hezbollah, a lot of these Islamic fundamentalism terrorism groups, in fact, they all don't like each other. Like Hamas, Hezbollah, the Islamic Jihad, the Taliban, the Houthis, most of the time when they're not talking about Israel, they're all kind of fighting over who's not Islamic, who's not Islamic enough, like who's like they all don't like each other. They all come down to a one unifying factor is killing Christians or killing Jews and killing Christians. And so the call through the Middle East for centuries, certainly this last century, has been first we come for the Saturday people and then we come for the Sunday people. So this isn't anything new, but it's a level of evil that is becoming more and more prevalent. And in the West, we like to think, well, if we can sit people down and just hear the grievances and hear what they want to say, and if we give them some land or if we give them some of this and give them some of that,
No,
then maybe
that's not
everything
going to
will work
work.
out. And
That's
if
not going to work.
and that's one thing, again, this can go in a different conversation, but I'll just make this one statement. People don't realize that the communities in Israel that were massacred on October 7th were some of the most far left pro peace, giving support even employing a lot of Gazans in their farms, to find out later that those same Gazans were the ones that were mapping out their communities, mapping out their families on which ones had defenses, which ones could be hit, who could be kidnapped, and taking all of that and going back to Hamas. And so it wasn't just simply that a band of bloodthirsty raiders came in. What was really happening is that many of those that came from Gaza had personal relationships with families on the Israeli side that they knew weren't going to fight back, and that was part of the reason for the slaughter. Like some of the most pro-peace, pro-Palestinian Israelis were living along the Gaza border, and those were the ones that were slaughtered. And so,
The only thing I can say, and this was a word I'm trying to be diplomatic here, Doug, as you could probably tell. They're animals. Okay, they're animals. I have no other way of putting it. I saw something on the news earlier, and we talked about it before we went on the air. The Abrams Accord will never be signed by Arab nations, Iran, or any of these other countries because they hate Israel so much. They want Israel wiped off the face of the earth, and and Iran wants us wiped off the face of the earth. And that's why I don't believe the Abrams Accord will ever be signed by all these different nations. Maybe one or two just to get along because they're tired of war. But since October 7th, I presume things have changed with the IDF and with Israel and with other countries that they always are looking back. What's going on? Got to be careful. You
dramatically.
can't go here. right?
Dramatically, and that's with having personal friends all over the land. I mean, on October 7th, on the 8th, on the 9th, I had friends up in the Galilee that were, locked and loaded in their homes, ready to defend their homes because they didn't know if the Arab community next door was going to start the next raid or what was coming. So, like, everything has changed, and I want to say too that that's not an issue of anti-Arab or anti-Islamic anything. We're talking about people that have committed themselves to death, destruction, and murder, and that's what they've given themselves to. And what do you do with the lion and the bear that are an unrepentant lion and bear? A
Hmm.
good shepherd like David, he kills the lion and the bear. You have to put them down to protect the sheep and to protect the communities. That's what
Yeah.
good shepherds do, is they defend the sheep.
What do you think? We've got about 10 minutes. Where do you see things going? You know, I I sometimes question Benjamin Netanyahu's decisions. I'm not Israeli. I'm Jewish, but I'm not Israeli. I sometimes question what he's doing. I sometimes don't understand it. I don't get it, but it's not for me to get. I don't live in Israel. I don't live under that constant panic of where are we going to get bombed tomorrow? Are we going to get this tomorrow? I live here in the middle of Florida. You live up in Maine, but when you're not touring. Um, where do you think this is eventually going to lead to? Is it going to come down to the only way there's going to be peace in the Middle East is the return of Jesus Christ?
Here's that's really what this comes down to, is that if you don't read the Bible, if you don't believe the Bible, there is no answers. That's when you hear pundits say, that it's confusing, it's this conflict is, complex, and it's all, nobody really knows how and what the answer is. The prophets wrote all of this out very, very clearly. And so where is this leading? According to the prophets, this is what your Bible, if you read your Bible in the Old Testament, what the prophets talked about, it
Yeah,
says the people are going to return to the land. The physical land will respond, and the land will become more prosperous than it's ever been before. That's some of what I'm documenting in Israel Rising in the photo books. It says the waste and forgotten cities will be rebuilt. It
right.
says that the whole house of Israel will stand up as an exceedingly great army in Ezekiel 37. That's happened as well. And it talks about how that the people will be multiplied, and as the people return from all over the earth. It also says that if you are a Christian and you are a believer in Jesus and you are awaiting the return of Jesus, according to Zechariah 12 and 14, it says that when he arrives on the Mount of Olives, there are two specific details that sort of are in place when he arrives. Number one is that it's a Jewish Jerusalem, and number two is that all nations have gathered against Israel. And so, if you are a Christian awaiting the return, what the prophets say about his arrival is that he's arriving to defend his people in Jerusalem when all nations are gathering against him. So, are gathering against Israel. So, are things getting worse? Are things getting darker and more intense? Yes, absolutely. But
Yeah,
this is all very clearly laid out in the scriptures of how this process is going to be going. Now, I'm not, who am I to say next week, next month, next year, whatever? I'm just saying is that if much of what the prophets have said have come to pass in a very tangible and practical way, the things
yeah,
that haven't happened yet, like the arrival, we're seeing those things set up. Right now, for the first time ever in human history, do we have almost the entire world discussing and making their decisions on how they feel about Jewish people living on Jewish land. And to give you an idea of how ridiculous this sounds, is that the Jewish population of the world is 0.2% of the world's population. So that's not 1%, not half a percent, not even a quarter of 1%, 0.2% of the world's population. And over half of all of the UN decisions are against Israel, and the rest, are about, there's even just last year alone, I think there's 17, 18 different resolutions versus 3 or 4 or 5 of others, like, why is it that all nations are beginning to focus on Israel and complain about Jewish people living in Jewish land? Well, again, to make this very, very simple, God has made a promise, and there is a very clear enemy who is not about God's promises. that is causing turmoil in the world to confront those promises. And to me, that's a lot of what's unfolding,
Yeah.
in the news and what we're seeing. And so, you know, we get to decide where we're going to focus. Are we going to focus
Yeah.
on the doom and gloom news, or the fact that we are living in a time and a season when your Bible is literally and tangibly coming to pass exactly as the prophet said? That's what my photo books are documenting. We mentioned about the online course at EzraAdventures.com. I can
Yeah.
literally show you videos of those things where the prophet's words are coming to
Yeah.
pass,
Yeah.
and it all
Well,
points back to God it all
yeah.
points back to God
Okay.
having a plan, and He's keeping His word.
Anyway, I want to thank you, Doug. We've run out of time here today, but I just want people to know, by the way, I am so sick of the anti Semitism that's going on in the world. We know where it's stemming from: stupidity and ignorance. Doug Hershey, he is a speaker, a storyteller, a writer. He's a good friend of mine. Go on to EzraAdventures.com, find out more about him. Go get the book, Israel is Rising. You will love it. It shows comparison photos from yesterday to today and everything in between, Jerusalem Rising as well. Doug, thank you so very much for taking the time out of your day to join us. Stay right where you are. And I just want to thank all of you, ladies and gentlemen, for taking the time to join us today. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back next week with another one. Until then, would you please take care of yourself? This is Gary Allen for Main Street and for Doug. And by the way, I keep forgetting to do this, to my executive producer of this show, Tommy said, thank you so much, Tommy, for being there with the bells and whistles. And to all of you, God bless you and take care.